Let me tell you a secret the sea keeps poorly. Off the coast of North Carolina, beneath waves that turn black in storms and shimmer silver at dawn, lies a place sailors whisper about with dread. They call it the graveyard of the Atlantic. To the untrained eye, it is nothing but shifting shoals and restless tides. But to those who know the sea's cruelty, it is a place where ships go to die. More than 2,000 wrecks rest in those waters. Merchantmen, galleons, warships, Andeas, some broken by storms, others dashed against sandbars that move like ghosts, and a few sent down by cannon fire in battles long forgotten. Divers say the seabed there sings with chains, timbers, and whispers that do not belong to the living. But the most chilling tales are of the pirate wrecks. Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge, run aground and swallowed by Beaufort Inlet. The Adventure, lost in the same shallows during his final stand. Countless unnamed sloops that chased plunder only to be dragged beneath by the very waters that fattened them with prey. Some say their masts still rise in storms, spectral silhouettes guiding new ships to the same fate. Imagine standing on a deck at night, the moon hidden, the waves hissing. Your compass spins wild. Your lookout swears he sees lanterns on the horizon, but when you look, there's nothing there. Then, with a shudder, your ship grinds into sand you never saw on the chart. The hull breaks, the sea pours in, and the last thing you hear before the water closes over you is laughter low. Smoky, not of this world. This is not just coastline. It is a graveyard, and every grave tells a story. Some of storms, some of greed, some of betrayal. Tonight, we'll walk among them not with our feet, but with our imagination. And we'll start with the most infamous wreck of all the night Blackbeard lost his floating fortress. The story begins not with a storm, but with silence. Beaufort Inlet in June of 1718 was deceptively calm. The tide sighing gently across the shoals, gulls circling lazily overhead. Yet beneath that calm lay death. The sandbars of the Carolina coast were treacherous, shifting with every tide, lying in wait like serpents beneath the waves. It was there that Blackbeard steered Queen Anne's Revenge, the great captured French slaver turned pirate fortress. She was monstrous, 40 cannons bristling from her sides, a crew of hardened rogues, and a reputation that preceded her like thunder before a storm. After the daring blockade of Charleston, she was heavy with plunder, her decks stacked with rum, sugar, and medicine. But more than treasure, she carried the weight of legend. I was a boy on that deck, little more than a runner of powder and water, but I remember the moment clearly. The air was hot, the horizon hazy. Blackbeard stood at the rail, his dark eyes fixed on the water ahead. His beard, thick and tangled, already held the smell of smoke and powder even without its burning fuses. "Steady, lads," he growled. "The inlet's narrow, but she'll take us through." But the inlet had other plans. The tide pulled hard against the hull, the wind shifted sudden, and the sandbars ever shifting, ever hungry, reached up to catch her. The sound was terrible. A grinding shriek as timbers met sand, a shudder that rattled every nail and bolt. Men staggered, barrels toppled, and the ship lurched, her mighty frame caught fast. Haul! Came the cries. Ropes were cast, anchors cut, sails trimmed, but nothing freed her. The Revenge groaned like a wounded beast. Another wave struck, forcing her deeper into the shoals. The sea had her now. Some whispered that Blackbeard did it on purpose, that he wanted to scatter the fleet, to rid himself of rivals, to keep the choicest treasure for himself. Others swore it was simply miscalculation. But I saw the look on his face, hard and unreadable, as the ship that had made him a legend died beneath him. "She's gone," he said at last, his voice flat. "Save what you can." Men scrambled, cannons were dragged to smaller sloops, casks rolled into boats, treasure ferried across the shallows. Sweat poured, curses flew, and all the while the tide gnawed at the stranded giant. By nightfall, Queen Anne's Revenge was nothing but a carcass, her masts tilting, her hull broken, her guns silent. We left her there, half buried in sand and shame. But Blackbeard, he did not mourn. He strode to his sloop Adventure and ordered sails raised, his eyes burning with something fiercer than grief. "The ship's dead," Alonso muttered beside me, his hands raw from hauling. "But the devil in him lives," and he was right. Blackbeard had lost his fortress, but not his fire. The wreck of the Revenge was only the beginning of the graveyard's feast. More would follow. More always followed. That night, as we pulled away under starlight, I looked back at the half-submerged hulk. The tide washed over her decks, lanterns swaying, their light dimming one by one. It felt less like a shipwreck than a burial. And yet, deep in my bones, I knew the sea does not bury quietly. It remembers, and sometimes it brings its dead back to the surface. The Carolina coast has never been gentle. To a landsman, it looks inviting, less dunes, grasses waving in the wind, the Atlantic glittering in blue and silver. But to sailors, it is a moor, a place where sand shifts like living things, where shoals creep forward like assassins, and where charts grow obsolete between one tide and the next. Even the most seasoned captain, with a keen eye and steady hand, could find himself snared by the invisible teeth of diamond shoals, frying pan shoals, or lookout shoals. Each name was earned, not given lightly, and so, when Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge lay broken at Beaufort Inlet, she was not alone. She was joining a congregation of the dead. I remember the days that followed. The inlet seemed to hunger for more. No sooner had the Revenge tilted on her side than another of our small vessels, the sloop Adventure, followed her into the grave. She struck the shoals while trying to maneuver too close, the sea tearing her hull until timbers split and water poured in. Men cursed, prayed, and leaped for their lives. By dusk, both ships, the terror of merchants and the pride of pirates, lay gutted in the same stretch of sand. Blackbeard, though furious, stood unmoved. "The sea takes what she pleases," he muttered, smoke rising from the matches in his beard as he watched from a rowboat. "She wants bones, she'll have them. But I'll not be among them today." For every pirate ship wrecked, another followed. Not always by storm, sometimes by greed. There was the Spanish galleon Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, a lumbering giant swollen with treasure and arrogance. She strayed too close to Cape Lookout in a summer squall. Her captain, desperate to hug the coast and avoid privateers, found himself instead embraced by shoals. The galleon heeled hard, her masts snapping, silver coins spilling from split chests as the sea gurgled into her belly. Survivors clawed ashore, dazed and beaten, only to be set upon by wreckers locals, who treated shipwrecks not as tragedy but as opportunity. I spoke once to a fisherman who claimed to have been there. He described the scene with a shudder. The surf carried barrels, timber, men alive and dead. The wreckers dragged the living out only if they thought they carried something worth the trouble. Elsewise, they let the sea keep them, and the dead they stripped before the bodies grew cold. It was said the sands near Lookout still glittered with silver for weeks after, children digging coins from tide pools. But the shoals remembered, and more ships followed, drawn to ruin as moths to flame. But the graveyard was not only storm and sand. Sometimes it was deception. Pirates were not victims themselves, became partners in the sea's cruelty. Lanterns were hung on horses or goats along the beaches, tricking ships into thinking they approached safe harbors. Captains steered toward the false lights, grounding themselves on hidden bars. By morning, their holds were empty, their crews slaughtered or scattered, their ships burned to hide the crime. One tale told in whispers was of the Greyhound, an English trader heavy with rum. Lured by ghostly lights near Ocracoke, she struck hard in the dark of night. Her captain cursed the heavens, then saw shadows moving on the dunesmen with torches, their faces hidden. By dawn, the Greyhound was ash. Her survivors vanished into the swamps. Some swore Blackbeard himself oversaw the trickery, though by then his own fortune was already souring. True or not, the story stuck, and every light seen on that shore thereafter was suspect. I learned to fear the sea's silence more than her storms. For storms at least announce themselves, clouds, thunder, lightning like a warning drum. Silence was the killer. A ship might sail in clear skies, steady wind, calm water and still. Beneath the keel, the sand waited. One moment the vessel cut cleanly through the waves. The next her hull ground to a halt, the sound like a scream of wood and metal. Men ran to and fro, casting lines, cutting anchors, lightening loads. But once the shoals had you, they did not let go. I saw it happen to the sloop Mermaid, a vessel manned by half-drunk rogues bound for Nassau. She struck frying-pan shoals at dawn. The men sang Bodie songs one moment and screamed the next as the tide dragged her sideways. I was aboard another ship nearby, and we watched helplessly as the Mermaid split apart within the hour. Some men clung to barrels, others vanished beneath the surf. By nightfall, all that remained was her mast jutting from the breakers, a marker for future victims. Stories piled upon stories, each more terrible than the last. Sailors swore the shoals were cursed, that the bones of drowned men called to the living, pulling them into the same fate. They told of ghost ships' masts glowing faintly in moonlight, sails tattered, drifting just out of reach. Some said they saw lanterns swinging in the rigging of ships that had sunk years before, the dead relighting their decks to lure new prey. One night, camped on Ocracoke shore, I heard Alonzo whisper as the surf boomed in the dark, "Mark me, boy. The graveyard doesn't just claim ships, it remembers them, and it lets em loose again when the living grow careless." I laughed then, though uneasily, but the next night our lookout swore he saw a brig drifting beyond the breakers, her sails black, her lanterns glowing. No such ship had sailed in those waters for weeks. When dawn came, nothing remained but gulls circling. But the most chilling moment came months after Blackbeard's fall. I was in Beaufort, a small harbour town buzzing with gossip. A diver, one of the madmen who braved the shoals for salvage, stumbled into the tavern, pale as chalk, clothes dripping salt. He carried a rusted pistol in one hand and a length of charred wood in the other. "They're still down there," he rasped, voice shaking. "Cannons, anchors, bones, and something else. Something watching." The room fell silent. He set the pistol on the table. Its barrel was fused, as if by fire, though it had spent years beneath the sea. Then he laid the wood beside it. It smelled faintly of smoke. "The sand shifts," he whispered. "It covers, it uncovers. Some nights the Revenge groans, like she's still trying to free herself. And when the tide is high, I swear I heard laughter. Deep, ragged, like a man who knows he cannot drown. No one spoke. No one laughed. The tavern keeper poured him rum without charge, and we all drank hard that night, trying to banish the image his words had planted. The graveyard of the Atlantic is not a place. It is a hunger. It took the Revenge. It took the adventure. It took Spanish galleons, English traders, nameless sloops and proud frigates alike. It took men by the hundreds, their bones ground into the sand, their souls perhaps wandering the shoals still, and each wreck was a story, each story a warning. But the sea has no memory for warnings. She only remembers the taste of timber and flesh. That is why, even now, sailors grow quiet when they sail off Carolina. That is why, even now, the graveyard has not stopped growing. For every wreck it keeps, another waits just beyond the horizon. And the most terrifying thought of all is this: not every wreck stays buried. The graveyard of the Atlantic did not only feed on storms and sand, it fed on men. Along the shores of Carolina, in villages of rough-hewn huts and wind-blasted shacks, there lived people who learned to turn shipwrecks into survival. They were called wreckers salvagers by name, but wolves, in truth. The line between pirate and wrecker was thinner than a knife edge. Pirates hunted ships in open water, their banners bold, their cannon loud. Wreckers let the sea do their killing for them, and when the waves hurled broken ships onto the sand, wreckers descended, tearing them apart like scavengers upon a carcass. I first saw it with my own eyes on a chill morning after a storm. The surf was full of wreckage barrels, planks, dead men with their eyes open to the sky. A Dutch brig had gone down on the frying pan shoals, driven ashore in the night. By dawn, her bones lay scattered across the beach, but before the sun was high, figures appeared on the dunes. Men with lanterns, women with baskets, even children running barefoot through the sand. They moved quickly, practiced, like ants swarming a drop of honey. They pried open barrels, dragged chests from the tide, stripped corpses of boots and rings. One woman pulled a silver cross from a drowned man's neck, kissed it once, and slipped it into her apron. Alonso, beside me, spat in the sand. See them, wreckers. No better than us, but they don't risk their necks at sea. They wait for the ocean to do the work. I watched in silence, unsettled. These were not pirates, not sailors. They were farmers, fishermen, widows' people who lived by the shore's mercy. And yet, in their eyes, I saw the same hunger I'd seen in Nassau taverns. The same gleam when treasure spilled on a table. The graveyard did not care who feasted, but wreckers were not always patient. Some did more than wait. They learned to summon wrecks the way a fisherman lures fish at night. False lights were set along the dunes. Lanterns tied to horses or goats, moving with deceptive rhythm, mimicked the bob of a ship's lantern. Captains, steering through the dark, desperate for safe harbor, mistook the trickery for salvation. They turned their ships toward shore, and the shoals swallowed them whole. I heard one tale often, told in whispers after rum. The sea nymph, an English trader, staggered toward Ocracoke in a gale. Her crew spotted what they thought were harbor lights and steered hard toward them. By the time they realized the truth, the keel had struck sand, the masts were cracking, and the breakers were devouring her. Survivors crawled ashore, choking, grateful for land only to find themselves surrounded by men with knives and clubs. By dawn, every survivor was stripped, their cargo gone, their ship burned to erase the crime. Were pirates involved? Some said yes. Some swore Blackbeard himself used wreckers as allies, lighting false beacons to draw prey into his jaws. Whether true or not, the rumor gave wreckers a shadowed power. And once a story sticks to a name, the sea never washes it away. I met one of them once. A wiry man named Ephraim Ketch, his beard salt-stiff, his eyes pale as driftwood. He claimed he was only a fisherman, but everyone knew he was more. Storms feed us, he told me one night by a fire, his voice low and gravelly. Every wreck is God's will. What washes up belongs to the shore folk, same as fish or oysters. The sea takes, the sea gives. We just take what's given, and the dead. I asked. He shrugged. Dead men don't need boots. Dead men don't need rings. There was no malice in his tone, no shame. To him it was nature, as natural as the tide itself. But there were darker tales in the village of Portsmouth. I heard of a wreck so savage the story lingered decades. A Spanish ship, heavy with wine and silver, broke apart on Diamond Shoals. Survivors staggered ashore, pleading for help. The villagers welcomed them, offering food and fire. But when night fell, knives were drawn. By morning, not one Spaniard lived, and the village coffers brimmed with stolen silver. Some swore the ghosts of those sailors still wandered the dunes. Their cries carried on the wind. Fishermen reported hearing Spanish voices in the surf, prayers mingled with curses. And when ships broke on those same shoals in later years, some said they saw figures on the beach holding lanterns, their faces pale, their clothes dripping wet, their hands too cold to be alive. Were they wreckers, or the dead themselves, luring new victims to share their fate? No one dared answer. The sea was cruel, but wreckers gave her cruelty human hands. And soon, law began to take notice. Governors, pressed by merchants and shipowners, tried to stamp out the practice. But the coast was long, the villages isolated, and the rewards too rich. Officials looked away if their pockets were greased. Priests thundered from pulpits about sin, but even they wore silver crosses taken from the tide. I once saw a parson in Beaufort accept a donation for his Chipola golden chalice, shining in the candlelight. Whispers said it came from a wreck on Lookout Shoals, torn from the hand of a dead priest whose body was still warm. Yet there it sat, on the altar, sanctified by prayer. The line between salvation and plunder blurred as easily as footprints in sand. But wrecking carried dangers beyond law or conscience. One winter, a wrecked brig brought barrels of rum ashore near. Villagers feasted, drinking until the streets were chaos. Fights broke out, blades flashed, and by dawn half the village lay bleeding. Survivors swore they heard laughter over the dunes that night, deep and ragged, like Blackbeard himself had come to claim his share. Another time, a chest of coins washed ashore near. Two brothers found it and swore to share. But greed is a sharper knife than any cut. By morning, one brother was dead, the other vanished, and the chest gone. Days later, fishermen claimed to see both brothers wandering the shore at dusk, one bloody, one weeping, both staring out to sea. The graveyard did not just swallow ships, it swallowed men's souls. I think often of the faces I saw that first Datha, woman pocketing the cross, the children dragging casks. To them it was survival. To me it was theft from the dead. But perhaps there is no difference. The sea makes killers of us all, in time. And yet, the wreckers were not alone in their hunger. The Royal Navy, the merchants, even the governors, they all profited in their way. Salvage laws blurred lines further, declaring wrecks fair game under certain conditions. A ship stranded might be saved for a share or plundered outright. Justice shifted like the shoals, depending on who held the gavel. In the end, the graveyard had many hands. Pirates, wreckers, governors, even priests. Each took their cut, each fed on the bones of ships. One night in Ocracoke, I asked Alonso whether wreckers were worse than pirates. He took a long pull of rum, then said, "Pirates kill you quick. Wreckers let the sea do the killing, then smile as they take your boots. Which devil's worse? That's for God to answer." He looked out across the dark water, where breakers glowed faint under moonlight. "But I'll tell you this, boy. When you hear a lantern swinging out there at night prey, it's a pirate. A pirate you can fight, a ghost or a wrecker. You can't fight what you can't see." I shivered, and I have never looked at a lantern on a lonely shore the same way again. For the graveyard is not only made of sand and storm, it is made of men, greedy and desperate, who learned to harness the sea's cruelty as their own. And sometimes, in the dark, it's hard to tell whether the lantern you see belongs to the living or the dead. Words count. Approximately 2252, the graveyard of the Atlantic is not silent. It murmurs, it whispers, it sings, but its songs are not for the living. Every sailor who ever stood watch off Cape Hatteras has heard it. The mournful cry of wind through rigging that no longer stands, the low boom of waves striking timbers long since buried, the faint, uncanny sound of voices that seem to ride the tide. It is said the sea remembers. And off Carolina, the sea remembers too much. The first story I ever heard was of a ship that should not have been there. I was a boy then, drinking sour rum in a Beaufort tavern, when an old pilot leaned across the table, his eyes clouded with age and fear. "They call her the Ashen Lady," he whispered, his breath heavy with salt and liquor. "A brig with sails grey as smoke, seen only on storm nights. She runs before the wind, but she makes no sound. No creak of timber, no splash of wave. And when she passes, the water goes calm, like she drinks the sea into her hull." I asked what happened to those who followed her. He shivered. "They don't return. Or if they do, they come back pale and quiet, their eyes hollow, as if they left their souls on her deck." I laughed nervously then, but later, when storms shook our own ship, I remembered his words. And once, in the lightning's flash, I swore I saw a pale outline on the horizon cells, fluttering though no wind touched our rigging. I said nothing, but I prayed hard until dawn. Other tales spoke not of ships, but of voices. The Spanish sailors who died on Diamond Shoals were said to cry still. Fishermen claimed to hear them when the fog rolled thick, prayers and curses in a tongue no Carolinian understood. Ave Maria, one man swore he heard, clear as bells, just before his nets tore and he lost half his catch. Another claimed he woke one night on his sloop to find figures standing in the surf, their clothes dripping, their eyes glowing pale. He pulled anchor and fled, swearing never to fish those waters again. Alonso once told me, "It's not the living you need fear, boy. It's the drowned. They want company. They want someone to share the weight of the sea." I did not believe him, not then, but the sea has a way of carving belief into a man. One night, after a raid gone wrong, We ran our battered sloop into O'Crecock for repair. The crew scattered ashore to drink and sleep, but I stayed near the water, too shaken by the fight. The tide was high, the moon bright, and there out beyond the breaker's eye saw lanterns. 2, 3, 4, swinging faintly as though on a ship's rigging. But no ship had entered the inlet. No ship could, not with the sandbars shifting like they did. Still, the lights bobbed and swayed. Do you see that? I whispered to Alonso, who had staggered down with a bottle. He squinted, then spat. Aye, ghost lanterns. Best not to look too long. What are they? Lost ships, lost men. Sometimes the drowned light their way back. Sometimes wreckers light the shore. Either way, you look too long, you'll follow them, and the shoals will have you. I turned away quick, my heart pounding, but the image stayed burned in my mind, for lonely lights swaying in the dark, as though the dead were signaling me to join them. Then there was Blackbeard. Of all the ghosts said to haunt the graveyard, none was fiercer than him. His death at O'Crecock should have ended the tale. His head swung from Maynard's bowsprit, his body fed to the crabs, and yet sailors swore they still heard his laughter in the surf, deep and ragged, rolling with the waves. Divers claimed the wreck of the Adventure groaned like a dying man when the tide rose, as though Blackbeard himself was still trapped inside, and on storm nights. More than one lookout swore he saw a ship with black sails and a glowing beard of sparks racing across the horizon. The devil's back for his own, they muttered, crossing themselves, and he'll not rest till every ship drowns with him. I never saw him myself, not clearly, but once anchored off Beaufort, I woke to the smell of smoke. Not fire smoke, sharp and bitter, the kind that clung to Blackbeard's beard when his matches burned. I stumbled on deck, but no flame burned, no lantern swayed. Only the sea, calm and wide, whispering secrets I dared not hear. Another tale, told with hushed voices was of the phantom crew. Men swore that sometimes, in fog, you could hear the sound of rowboats cutting water, oars dipping in perfect rhythm. If you called out, the sound stopped. But if you stayed quiet, the boats would drift past, unseen but heavy, as if carrying men who had no flesh. Fishermen said nets, cast in those waters, sometimes pulled up bones. Long, water-polished bones, with scraps of rope still tied around them. Some tossed them back, muttering prayers. Others kept them, selling them as curios to travellers. Those who kept them rarely lasted long. One wreck diver told me of a skull he found beneath the sand. Its jaw was fused shut by rusted iron, as if a man had drowned with a bit between his teeth. He brought it ashore, laughing at superstition. That night his house caught fire. He was never seen again. The skull, they say, was back on the beach by morning. I began to wonder, as all sailors do, whether the ghosts were real, or whether fear itself made them. After all, the graveyard did not need spirits to kill. It had storms, shoals, and men's own folly. But when the nights stretched long, and the wind carried strange sounds, it was hard to dismiss the idea that something lingered. Even the wreckers, hard-hearted as they were, left offerings. Coins tossed into surf, bread left on dunes, candles lit in ruined chapels, not for God, not really, but for the dead, to appease them, to keep them quiet. I once asked Ephraim Ketch, the wrecker, if he believed in ghosts. He gave me a long, hollow look. Boy, he said, every wreck is a ghost. Timber don't groan like that unless it remembers. Every wave out there's got blood in it, and every man who drowns leaves a piece of himself behind. You think that disappears? You think the sea lets go? His words stayed with me. The graveyard's ghosts were not always cruel. Some spoke of warnings. A captain once told me he was steering blind in fog when he heard a voice shouting in his ear, "Hard a port." He spun the wheel in panic, and a moment later a sandbar loomed where his bow would have struck. He swore no man stood near him, and no voice but his own crew's had spoken. Yet he lived, and his ship sailed on. Another sailor told of a woman who appeared on deck during a storm. Her hair dripping, her eyes pale as the moon. She raised her hand, pointing toward calmer waters. The helmsman, terrified, obeyed. By dawn, they were safe. When he turned to thank her, she was gone. The crew swore she was the spirit of a drowned passenger, guiding them to safety so no others would share her fate. But for every kind ghost, there were 10 that were not. What is a ghost, if not memory? And the graveyard of the Atlantic has too many memories. Every broken mast, every rusted cannon, every drowned man's ring is a story. And stories have weight. They cling. They whisper, "I cannot say whether I believe." But I know this: when you stand on the dunes at night, the wind whipping the grass, the breakers glowing white, and you hear voices that are not your own, you will believe then. And once you've heard them, you will never sail those waters with ease again. The Crown could ignore piracy in Nassau, smuggling in Jamaica, even rebellion in the Carolinas. But the graveyard of the Atlantic was another matter. It was not just pirates who haunted those waters, not just wreckers stripping corpses on the sand. It was trade itself, the lifeblood of empire bleeding into the sea. Too many ships, too much coin, too many letters from desperate merchants poured into London. Something had to be done, and so the king sent his men. The first I ever saw was the frigate Scarborough, her sides gleaming, her sails taut with discipline. She cut into Beaufort Harbour like a blade through cloth, her guns bristling, her crew polished and neat. The townsfolk gathered to gape, children pointing at the Union Jack snapping in the wind. For them it was safety. For Usman, who had lived by the chaos of the graveyard, it was a storm on the horizon. The captain, a stiff Englishman named Ellis Brand, announced his mission in the tavern. By His Majesty's order, piracy will be rooted out. Wrecking will be punished. The shoals themselves will be charted. He spoke as though the sea would obey him simply because he spoke with an accent polished in London. Men laughed quietly into their cups. For a time, the frigate patrolled. She captured 2 small sloops, their crews hanged in Portsmouth as examples. She chased smugglers through inlets, her longboats cutting through reeds. She even strung lanterns along lookout shoals, hoping to mark safe channels. But the shoals shifted within weeks, and the lanterns only lured more men to death. The graveyard is no respecter of kings, but the navy did not stop. Other ships followed, the Pearl, the Lime, and smaller sloops of war, swift and shallow, better suited to chasing pirates into the marshes. Their captains came eager for glory, dreaming of dispatches praising their names. Some found it. Most found only ruin. I remember one officer, young and proud, boasting he would take Blackbeard's head. He sailed his sloop too close to Ocracoke, hunting shadows. The tide turned, the shoals took him, and his ship lay broken before midnight. Survivors swore they saw lanterns on the beach wreckers, waiting like wolves. By dawn, the Navy's banner floated torn in the surf, and the officer's body lay stripped on the sand. His name never made it to London. The battle between pirates and navy was not always at sea. It played out in courts, in taverns, in governors' mansions. Merchants begged for protection. Planters begged for freedom to trade with whoever paid best. Some governors, like Spotswood of Virginia, waged relentless war. Others, like Eden of North Carolina, pocketed bribes and turned their heads. I once sat in a tavern while two Royal Navy officers argued with a local magistrate. "You harbor pirates," one spat, slamming his tankard down. "We know Teach dined here. We know wreckers sell plunder under your very nose." The magistrate smiled thinly. "And what would you have us do, sir? Hang half the colony? Pirates spend coin, wreckers fill bellies. Your king is far away. Hunger is close." That was the truth of it. The navy fought not only pirates, but poverty, greed, and the sea itself. And the sea was always the stronger enemy. Still, there were victories. Maynard's triumph over Blackbeard in 1718 was the greatest. His name became legend overnight. The officer who slew the demon of the seas. His report to Spotswood claimed discipline and courage. The sailors whispered it was luck and blood. Whatever the truth, the crown cheered, and more ships came, eager to press the advantage. For a brief time, piracy waned. The taverns grew quieter, the shoals less crowded with prey. But the graveyard was never empty. Smugglers still threaded its inlets. Wreckers still lit their false fires. Storms still broke hulls and men alike. The navy might hang a pirate, might burn a village, but it could not tame the tide. One officer, grim after months of failure, told me in Beaufort, "We can fight men, but how do we fight sand? How do we hang the wind?" His ship ran aground a month later. The navy also sought treasure. Salvage expeditions were mounted to recover cannons, coin, and powder from wrecks. Divers in crude suits, weighted with lead, groped through the murk while sailors hauled lines above. They brought up rusted anchors, chests of silver, bones tangled in rope. Some said the divers heard voices below calling, whispering, laughing. A few refused to go back down. I met one diver, a hollow-eyed man named Briggs. He showed me a coin he had taken from the Revenge. It was fused to a lump of iron, blackened as though by fire. "She's not done," he muttered, fingers trembling. "That ship breathes still." I heard her timbers groan like a dying man. He drowned 6 weeks later, caught in a sudden squall. The coin was found in his pocket, slick with salt. Wreckers and pirates did not go quietly. Many turned their fury on the navy itself. Ambushes in creeks, blades in taverns, sabotage in harbors. More than one navy captain died not in battle, but with poison in his cup. The coast was too long, the shoals too many, the locals too eager to look the other way. One story told of the Lime, which pursued a sloop into Pamlico Sound. The sloop ran aground deliberately, her crew escaping into marshes. The Lime, heavy and eager, struck the same shoal and stuck fast. By dawn, wreckers descended. They stripped the Navy frigate under the very noses of her crew, who sat helpless on the listing deck. The captain, shamed, shot himself rather than face London's scorn. The wreckers sold the Navy's own guns in taverns days later. The Navy learned, but slowly. They shifted from grand frigates to smaller sloops. They relied on local pilots, men who knew the shoals as one knows scars on their own body. They patrolled relentlessly, flogging deserters, hanging pirates. posting guards at taverns, and yet every patrol ended the same. More wrecks, more graves. The shoals swallowed navy and pirate alike, indifferent to banners. The graveyard was not a battlefield the king could win. It was older than England, older than crowns, older than men. One night, years after Blackbeard's death, I stood on a beach near Carritic as a navy cutter chased a smuggler through breakers. The cutter struck hard, her bow splitting. Men screamed as the sea poured in. Lanterns swung, shouts echoed, and then silence. By dawn, the cutter was bones on the sand. The smuggler escaped. The navy buried their dead. The wreckers dragged timbers home. The shoals smiled, if sand can smile. And I realized then, the king's men were not enemies of pirates, nor allies of merchants. They were simply offerings, like all the rest. The graveyard of the Atlantic had room for every banner, even today. Divers pull cannons stamped with royal crests from those sands. They lie beside rusted cutlasses, pirate pistols, silver coins, and nameless bones. Crown and outlaw together, indistinguishable in death. The navy tried to tame the graveyard. It failed, for how do you tame the sea? By the time the 18th century staggered to its close, the graveyard of the Atlantic had already claimed hundreds of ships. Pirates, traders, warships, even fishing, sloops all swallowed into the shoals. Bones ground into sand, iron rusting in silence. Blackbeard had fallen. The wreckers had grown fat and thin again in cycles. The Royal Navy had tried and failed to impose order, yet the sea remained, and it was hungry still. In those years, sailors began to speak of the coast not merely as dangerous, but as cursed. The shoals seemed alive, shifting deliberately, moving like serpents to catch new prey. Diamond shoals, frying pan shoals, lookout shoals. They were not static sandbars. They slithered, creeping, growing, vanishing, reappearing miles away. Charts could not hold them. Pilots could not predict them. The graveyard was not just water and sand. It was a living thing. I heard one old captain say it plainly. The graveyard eats what the sea cannot keep, and it ate still. American independence changed flags, not fates. The revolution filled the coast with privateers, eager for British prey. Many returned with plunder. More never returned at all. Their bones joined the Spanish, the English, the pirates, all equal in the tide's ledger. One tale told of the Liberty Belle, an American sloop chasing a prize off Hatteras. She pressed too hard into the breakers, blinded by greed. The sand caught her, the tide dragged her sideways, and she split within the hour. Survivors claimed they heard voices beneath the roar of waves' laughter, deep and smoky, echoing through the surf. Teach, one man swore. It was Blackbeard, mocking us. The wreckers came, as they always did. The survivors scattered. The graveyard smiled, but storms were the true reapers. No warship or pirate could match them. The hurricanes of the Carolinas came without mercy, rolling from the tropics like giants with fists of wind. Ships fled when they could, anchored when they could not. Often it made no difference. In 1822, a storm struck the coast with fury. A convoy of American merchants, caught unawares, tried to ride it out. By dawn, 5 lay shattered on frying pan shoals. Survivors clung to wreckage, their screams carried to shore on the gale. Farmers and wreckers waded into the surf, dragging men out. Some they saved, some they robbed, and many more they let the sea keep. One survivor, half drowned, begged a wrecker woman for water. She gave him rum instead, laughed, and left him to die. His body washed ashore the next day, his hands still clawing the sand. The graveyard had claimed him twice, and yet, despite centuries of death, men kept sailing into its maw. They had no choice. The Carolina coast guarded vital trade routes: silver from the Caribbean, tobacco from Virginia, rum and sugar from the islands, soldiers and settlers moving north and south. To sail the Atlantic was to risk the graveyard. Captains prayed to pass unscathed. Many did not. I myself once sailed past Cape Hatteras on a calm day. The sea glittered, the sky was clear, and yet I felt it's the weight of unseen graves beneath. Fish darted, gulls wheeled, waves hissed against the hull, but beneath us lay cannons, coins, bones, dreams. The graveyard was not past. It was present, watching, waiting. By the 19th century, the wrecks grew too many to ignore. Lighthouses rose, tall and proud, their lamps sweeping the night in warning. Cape Hatteras Light, its beams stretching across black water, became a sentinel. Yet even lighthouses could not hold back the shoals. Storms toppled them, sands swallowed them, and ships still struck the bars. Divers came with new tools, helmets, air pumps, weighted boots. They descended into the murk, groping through wreckage centuries old. They brought up coins, timbers, bones, even whole cannons, and with each treasure came new tales. One diver told of a ship he found deep beneath shifting sand. Its timbers were charred black, though no fire could burn under the sea. Its cannons lay twisted as if by heat. In the sand beside it, he found fused iron, sharp as glass, still smelling faintly of smoke. He refused to dive again. Another swore he saw figures moving in the wreck shadows where no man could be. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide, and when he reached out, the water itself pulled him back. He surfaced, screaming, tore off his helmet, and never returned to the sea. The legends only grew. Fishermen whispered of ghost ships still sailing the shoals. The Ashen Lady, Blackbeard's revenge. Spanish galleons with lanterns glowing faintly, just out of reach. Some claimed to see spectral crews hauling at rigging, their voices lost in the wind. Others swore drowned sailors called their names in the night, promising gold if they would only steer closer. I cannot say what is true, but I know this: no coast on earth has birthed so many stories, because no coast on earth has swallowed so much. The graveyard of the Atlantic is not history. It is ongoing. Even in our own century, the hunger does not fade. Modern freighters, tankers, even warships have foundered off Carolina. Storms still roll, shoals still shift, compasses still spin. Steel rusts as surely as timber. Radar fails as surely as charts. Divers find not just old wrecks, but new. Wooden timbers beside iron hulls, coins beside soda bottles, cutlasses beside rifles. The sea jumbles centuries together, all equal in her keeping. One diver I met, young and bold, told me of a wreck he explored near Diamond Shoals. It was layered, he said, eyes wide. A Spanish hull below, a Civil War steamer above, a modern fishing boat scattered on top. 3 centuries of graves stacked like bones in a common pit. That is the truth of the graveyard. Time itself collapses there. Past and present mingle. The dead never leave. And what of treasure? Aye, there is plenty still. Coins lie buried, emeralds glint in the sand, silver bars rust under coral. But the true treasure is stranger. The graveyard keeps stories. It keeps fear. It keeps the echo of every scream, every prayer, every last breath taken beneath waves. That is why divers speak of hearing voices, why fishermen dream of lanterns swaying in fog, why children in Beaufort still dare each other to walk the dunes at night, listening for the drowned. The graveyard's wealth is not in gold, but in memory. Memory that will not let go. And here is the twist, the final cruel joke. Not all wrecks are known. Not all bones are counted. Every storm shifts the sands, covering one grave, uncovering another. Cannons rise from the seabed after centuries. Timbers appear where no wreck was charted. Coins scatter across beaches like offerings. Each storm is a resurrection. Each tide a revelation. What lies beneath us is not fixed. It stirs. It waits. Some divers claim the revenge still shifts in her grave. Timbers creaking, iron groaning, as if she longs to rise again. Others whisper that Blackbeard's headless body still wanders the shoals, searching for his skull. And more than one fisherman swears they've seen a figure on the dunes at night. Beard smoking, eyes burning, pointing toward the sea dot. Is it true? Or is it fear shaping fog into form? Does it matter? Fear is real enough. What I know is this: the graveyard of the Atlantic is not finished. It is not a story of the past. It is a story that writes itself still, with every storm, every tide. Every ship that dares the Carolina coast, and someday, when your grandchildren sail those waters, the graveyard will be waiting, because the sea is endless, and her appetite never dies. The graveyard of the Atlantic is not only a place where ships die, it is a place where stories refuse to. Blackbeard, Spanish galleons, Royal Navy frigates weather by storm, sand or steel, they all lie together, whispering beneath the waves. And every storm uncovers something new. The shocking truth. The graveyard is still growing. Even now, ships vanish, and even now, divers hear voices. It is not a relic of history, it is a living hunger.